J.M. Frey, and I'm a science fiction and fantasy author. Today we will be jumping back into nonfiction as I read a bit of my chapter from The Secret Loves of Geek Girls, edited by Hope Nicholson and put out by Bedside Press. And this is a really impressive volume because she put it together via Kickstarter, and the names in it are incredible. Adrian Kress, Sam Meggs, Margaret Atwood. I am in a book with Margaret Atwood. And more than that, this is the Kickstarter cover, but your very own version will be coming to you from Dark Horse Comics soon. I'm going to be published by Dark Horse Comics. Sorry, biggest nerd in the world right now. So I want to read a little bit of my chapter, How Fanfiction Made Me Gay. Now I do have to explain something about this chapter. When I'm putting together a new story, I name it something glib, like the one with the gay aliens, or the one with the Mary Sue who fights barbarians. I don't title things seriously until the story is finished, and then I go back and decide what the title should be. In this case, I forgot to give the chapter a serious title, so when I sent it off to Hope, she used How Fanfiction Made Me Gay, and she publicized that on Kickstarter, and then I couldn't change it. So here it is, a little bit of How Fanfiction Made Me Gay. Once upon a time when we were all Bella Swan, my first crush was a sarcastic know-it-all immortal named Mythos, a character from Highlander. To this day, I am convinced that he is my perfect soulmate and the focus of my sexual awakening. Lots of people cite the boiler room scene from My So-Called Life, Jareth in Labyrinth, Colin Firth in Pride and Prejudice, and any or all members of the Fellowship of the Ring. But mine happened when Mythos rolled out of bed in nothing but boxers to defend his life with a Roman short sword. When we are becoming women, we all want, and we all want to be wanted, but we don't know how to go about getting it. Media texts like 17 or Clueless aimed at adolescent girls are filled with first dates, first crushes, and foot-popping first kisses. We consume them voraciously because we are desperate for any kind of clue on how this is all supposed to work. And maybe for girls who identify with these sorts of media, it's possible that it is actually helpful. But to me, as a young goth, it wasn't. It offered me no advice and made fun of me. It labeled me a weirdo. As a baby geek, I was told that my interests and my desires weren't normal enough. Because of this, making a fool of myself in front of someone I liked was my biggest fear. My diary was filled with stories about the one picking me out of a crowd because of my unique specialness and sweeping me into an effortless romance where there was no fear of rejection, where he led the way so there was no fear of misstep on my part, and any fights could be resolved with passionate sex and a teary apology. I was his perfect mate in all ways. When I reread those diaries for this piece, I was struck by how similar this narrative was to that of Twilight, to Sailor Moon, and dozens of YA novels where the heroine is the love interest simply because of who she naturally is. This explains a lot about the popularity of these stories. These authors have tapped into that first yearning that we as young, inexperienced, but romance-hungry women possess. This is where fanfiction comes in, because fanfiction taught me everything there is to know about relationships. What is better than having the perfect romantic fantasy about a fictional character? Sharing it with your friends, of course. This isn't a new phenomenon. For as long as there has been fiction and celebrity, there have been fangirls talking about how dreamy Romeo is, or how fun Genji would be at a party, or the jerk with a heart of gold, Mr. Darcy. The Bronte sisters had such lady boners for the Duke of Wellington that they wrote hundreds of pages of fan fiction about the guy. That's true. This is a natural and normal part of coming to grips with one's own blossoming libido, and the great thing about the internet is that there's space to actually share these fantasies. Some of them starring you. A Mary Sue is a self-based character who is too perfect. This fanfiction trope is named for the protagonist Ensign Mary Sue from A Trekkie's Tale by Paula Smith, which first appeared in 1973 in a fic that lovingly lampooned Mary Sues. My first Mary Sue nobly sacrificed herself to the villain to save the series' protagonists. The villain was impressed with her bravery, and instead of killing her, romances her. She redeems his soul, and they live happily ever after. It was through writing and posting these Mary Sue stories that I began to read more fanfiction. In general, these stories are filled with the scenes that are missing, what happens after the canon story is over, or with the moments that are referred to but never shown on the screen. Many of these fics, especially the kind that deal with resolving the protagonist's sexual tension or relationships, taught me what it means to be a girlfriend, or a wife, or a lover. Here were stories written by women of every age, from every walk of life, and they weren't just writing about first kisses and Mary Sue's. They were writing about domestic situations, about buying curtains, about fighting over the remote, about miscarriages and bringing home baby, about wedding nights and divorces. These female writers were filling the worlds of fiction that I loved so much with a sort of realism that was absent in other media. They were telling stories based on their own lived experiences, even if they were happening in fantastical worlds. Here, finally, was the roadmap to my kind of romance. And more than that, fanfiction taught me everything I know about the mechanics of sex. The first time I felt my nipples get hard, I was reading fanfiction. I had read about nipples getting hard, but I'd never felt it before. It was weird and warm and sort of scratchy. Never before had my body done something like this without my say-so. It was strange. It was neat. It was a little bit scary. But fanfiction had already normalized it for me, so I wasn't freaked out. I've been reading a lot of male slash romances between two same-gendered characters who usually in the original fiction are straight. So I didn't know a lot about sex, and it never occurred to me to ask my mother. And Google and many of the sex and body positive sites didn't exist as a resource then. Then I realized that everything I need to know about sex I did learn in fan fiction. I later confirmed this with quick reads of the foreplay parts of some straight slash some hetero fanfiction, and I looked through an honest-to-God hard copy encyclopedia. Through fanfiction, I learned about BDSM and the tenets of safe, sane, and consensual. I read stories featuring blood play, puppy play, sugar daddies, and professional sex workers. I read stories about tentacle sex, mind sex, and alien pollen that makes you do it. I read about safe sex, realistic sex, sex that was awful and aborted halfway through. I read about dental dams, condoms, and IUDs. I read about sex that was filled with laughter and sex that gets away from you, sex that gets a little too violent and requires a conversation after, and sex that wasn't violent enough and required a frank discussion of fulfilling kinks. My favorite, I can't believe I'm about to admit this out loud, my favorite was and is the alpha, beta, omega dynamic stories where beyond their primary biological sex, breeder, breedee, or neither, characters have a secondary gender which defines their place in society. These question what gender and sex really are in our world. Traits commonly assigned to each gender on the inherently flawed binary scale are blown apart, reassigned, or done away with altogether. These are stories where gender, fluidity, pansexuality, and trans bodies are celebrated and explored, where societies outside of a patriarchy are discussed. It questions what their pitfalls and advantages would be, and this arms readers with the vocabulary and critical thinking to take back into their real lives and start discussions. Discussions, I realized, that I was starting to have with myself because fan fiction taught me everything there is to know about questioning the default straight setting. While fanfiction was addressing the parts of the stories that we never got to see, it was also addressing the parts of our society and culture that are obscured, hidden, or taboo. I was a teenager in the days before same-sex marriage was legal in Canada, when there were maybe only 5 queer characters on television and erotica was not the mainstream hit that it is today. The only canonical lesbian I had ever seen on television was Ellen. But in fan fiction, everything was fair game. If we could turn protagonists into vampires, bounty hunters, or elves, we could sure as heck turn them into homosexual, bisexual, asexual, or any of the wonderful, beautiful in-betweens. Characters slid all over the rainbow, and through fan fiction I learned about identities like transgendered, gender fluid, and demisexual. Fan fiction writers, especially queer ones, found their voices by borrowing characters. They force room for themselves within narratives that exclude them. They appropriate the white, the straight, the cis, the male, and they transform it into the sorts of people they are or see around themselves. And in doing so, they made me, the white, straight, cis girl, accept their voices as authentic and human. And the more stories I read featuring a variety of arrangements of genitals and sexualities, the more I started to recognize myself in those written impulses. With the revelations they offered, the veils were pulled back, and I realized I wasn't quite as straight as I thought I was. If you would like to read the rest of the essay and the story about how fanfiction made me gay, please do pick up a copy of The Secret Loves of Geek Girls. It should be out very soon. It is available for pre-order from Dark Horse Comics right now. If you liked this or any of my other videos from JM Reads, please do check out the URL at the end of this video and subscribe below to my channel. See you next week. Bye-bye.